go back 4 years, 0 were made in India. American hegemony to Indian hegemony used to say that India exists in its diversity. Diversity is India.
This is Fareed Zakaria, the analyst American presidents read, the man whose job is to explain the world to Washington. And at a 2-hour lecture at Brown University, he set out to answer one question: is India actually becoming a great power? His verdict was not the one a Western room expected. Here it is in his words. He began where the case is hardest to argue with, the factory floor. For 30 years, the world had one answer to who makes everything: China. Fareed's opening was a quiet demolition of that idea.
And what is remarkable about that is, particularly on the iPhone dimension, if you go back 4 years, 0 were made in India. This is India essentially replacing China as the principal manufacturer of smartphones for the United States. And India can do that in phones, it can do it in other manufactured goods, it can do it in pharmaceuticals, it can do it in precursor chemicals, it can do it in minerals, it can do it in almost every area because of the size of India, the scale of it, and because of the fact that India does have fairly advanced technology and science. Manmohan Singh used to say that India exists in several centuries at the same time. And that is true for anyone who's ever visited India. You go to Bangalore and it feels like you're in the 21st century, and you go to Bihar and it feels like you're in the 17th century. And that reality is actually now turned into an advantage because you can get low-cost labor in Bihar and high-quality engineering in Bangalore. And that means that India has this extraordinary, maybe unique role that it can play.
Then the economy. And here he reached for the comparison Indians have waited a generation to hear a Western analyst make out loud.
Call it an upper middle power or a great power, but India is one of the most important. India, by contrast, is an open, messy, chaotic democracy, which somehow has managed in the openness, chaos, and democratic process to also grow pretty fast as China. China has had the fastest growth of any large economy in the history of the world, and it will not be equaled by India. But India has been the second fastest growing large economy in the world for the between that country. India is a much more open, consumer-led economy, largely driven at the high end.
But the core of his argument wasn't the numbers. It was something the other rising powers simply don't have and can't manufacture: India's difference.
Unusual, maybe even unique among the rising great powers. If you think of a Brazil, you think of an Indonesia, certainly you think of China, in that it is a country that also stands for something. It is not just an emerging nation that has become more and more powerful and economically competent and militarily strong. It's the biggest democracy in the world. It's a country that in many ways reflects some of the most important values of this liberal international order that I was describing. And in that way, it is different, I think, from a Brazil or an Indonesia, though both of them are democracies. Because India has been a democracy with extraordinary, almost awe, the way in which India is able to move fast and quickly, the way in which it has been able to.
And almost defined India as diversity. Diversity is India. And of course, the great statement from the founding fathers was India achieves.
In that sense, is a lot like the United States in that there is an inherent diversity in America that makes it very hard to impose this monoculture.
And then he said the thing an Ivy League room does not casually say about a former colony. He put India in the same breath as the two superpowers that came before it.
And that reality, the rise of China, the rise of India, the rise of Brazil and Indonesia and all these countries was reshaping the world in a way that I think people had not, particularly in the West. And the longer strategic outreach that the United States has made to India over the last 25 years is, I think, likely to endure because it is rooted in the geoeconomic and geopolitical realities that I was describing. And so I think that there is a new weight to India in the world. The potential, in a sense, is already being realized in that sense. The question becomes, can India also fulfill the promise that India represents in some way? Now, what do I mean by that? I mean that India is perhaps unusual, maybe even unique among the rising English hegemony to American hegemony to Indian hegemony, having then had three liberal superpowers that define the world. But it's an aspiration that I can't help thinking about. The title of the speech, A New Star Rises, comes from Nehru's Tryst with Destiny speech, which as a young boy, because my father was a politician, we used to hear this in the background of my house the way that my kids listen to Taylor Swift. And so even now, even though I don't think I've ever read the speech, I can still probably recite certainly the first paragraphs of it from memory. But when reading it for this talk, I noticed that a little bit further down in the speech, Nehru talks about a new star rising in the East. And he says it is a star of freedom. And so even there, right in the great founding document of India, is a reference to India's rise, but also to its values. And my hope is that what you see is not just an India rise, but it rising, holding its values intact for itself and the world.
For a generation, the West told one story about power with a fixed cast. America on top, China rising to challenge it, and everyone else in the audience. Fareed Zakaria just rewrote that cast from an American podium to an American room and moved India onto the stage as a lead. And notice what he did not do. He didn't call India a giant factory the way people once described China. He didn't reduce it to cheap labor or a big market. He called it something the other rising powers are not: a country that stands for something, a democracy from a start, a civilization that defines itself by its diversity. That is the part that unsettles the old assumptions, the idea that the next superpower might rise not by copying China's model, but by refusing to. This isn't the flattery of a diplomat. It's the cold assessment of the man whose entire career is telling the West what's coming next. The border is still contested. The reforms are unfinished. The manufacturing has a long way to go. But when the people who built the old order begin, on their own, to price India into the top tier, that isn't hype. That's the tell. A new star, they're finally admitting, is rising. And this time, the West is the one saying it.